Is my pleasure to officially welcome our hosts of today's webinar from Team Core, specializing in brokerage, advisory, and property management services. We are thrilled to have Matt Farrell, CEO and owner, Kevin Tamer, the Associate Vice President, Sam McLean, the other Associate Vice President, and Zack, the Director of Property Management, with us this morning. So for those that aren't aware, Team Core is very active in our community. They have been members of the Auburn Hills Chamber of Commerce for a number of years and have been participating in a number of our events, and we're always happy to see them and have them with us. But one of the things I'll mention is that, just to toot their horn as far as from the perspective so they don't have to do that, they have been featured in Crain's 40 Under 40, Top 50 People to Know in Real Estate, CoStar Power Broker Awards, and have received other accolades throughout the years. So on that note, I am going to turn it over to Matt Farrell. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Jean. We appreciate it. And members of the Auburn Hills Chamber, we appreciate the opportunity to present to you here this morning and hopefully share some nuggets and some ideas of wisdom of these interesting and trying times we're all going through. And hopefully some of this information will help you steer your business in the right direction going forward, and give you some tools to work with as we continue to navigate the changing times. The four key topics we want to jump on today are primarily right sizing of your space needs or your space requirements, and working through the size of your facility, the size of your office space, the size of your retail footprint, your restaurant footprint, and helping you navigate what might become the new normal or the new normality of a successful and revenue generating business. The second bullet point is doing that in the right and wrong way, i.e. landlord and tenant relations. Then we're going to jump a little bit into commercial market and the current status thereof, and things about the return to work strategies and things that we are soliciting and picking up from our customer base, which is made up of everything from accounting firms to law firms to automotive suppliers, mostly hunkered and based in the Southeast Michigan service market, but we represent clients throughout the country, and we are hearing lots of different strategies, from your smaller offices of 3 people to your larger offices of 1,200 people. We are seeing and hearing a lot of different strategies. We want to share some of that wisdom with you here today in hopes that it might ease your thought process and give you a better path going forward. So with that, I'll turn it over to Kevin. Kevin.
Great. Thanks, Matt. Yeah, one of the first things that Matt was saying there is the term right sizing. So the first thing that we're going to visit is if you're finding yourself in a situation where you are reducing that staff, some of the stats, 25, 50%. If you're in that predicament, you're in a current lease, you feel stuck, your revenue might be down. What are some options that I can do when I'm in a lease? And before we get to that, one of the things that we do want to go over is a quick market overview. And this is focused primarily on office, but it will capture kind of the scheme of kind of what's happening. And basically the next 3, 6, 12 months, however, that's very hard to predict. And I think anybody who's saying that they know what's going to happen is kind of crazy. So we're going to focus on this primarily side of what was happening kind of pre-COVID and where we were at. And what we're going to focus on here is the search analytics that's on the right. And this is an overview of the entire Oakland County office market. So what you'll see on that first, if you can see up here in the top left, there's 91 million square feet of office in Oakland County, of office product being leased and on the market. And the key analytic that we're going to look at is a red 446, almost 500,000 square feet of what we call a negative net absorption. And basically, the whole point of this is that the trend was already kind of being put back on the market, or space was already being put back on the market. That's what a negative net absorption means. Supply is increasing and our demand is kind of decreasing, right? So that was kind of already happening of pre-COVID. And some of the whys, if you're asking the question, is because of, open concept office space. And that whole trend of, we want open space, we kind of want that trendy, cool pack as many people into an office space as we can, get it down to 110, 150 square feet per employee, right? And that was kind of putting some square feet back on the market as companies like, oh, we can fit a lot more people into, smaller spaces. So we were starting to already see that. And then the continuation with what we call hotel seating, and then also, remote work was kind of already a trend. So that's just an analytic to kind of show kind of where we were at before COVID. But now we're going to focus on, well, what can you do as a tenant, as we start to progressing, as that trend is continuing, as we're starting to get into some, different predicaments, but just analyzing it from that point of view. And the first thing that we always look at with our clients is the term right sizing. And Sam, Matt, guys, and Zach, feel free to jump in here when you can. But the term right sizing is if they're at a current square footage, where can we go in terms of reduction, and where can they get to? And the first thing that we do is understand the company's utilization and their space efficiency with just a quick analysis. So the example that you'll see at the bottom of the screen here is a client of ours. But basically, this client was at 3,500 square feet, and they had 11 current full-time employees that were in the office. And by understanding their utilization and us doing an analysis of their space, we understood that they were about 30% dark on their space, meaning they did not use, certain conference rooms or certain offices. And the overall goal and focus of this was to get them down to more manageable square footage. And the same applies to that. If 25% of your workforce is going to be working from home, let's right size that space to get it to a more palatable number where you're going to see more efficiencies. And the benefits there, like you see on the screen: cost savings, employee support, and different culture. So what we did is the company's overall goal was to get down to 210 square feet per employee across all their locations as their leases were coming up on expirations. Basically what that equated to, as we went from, that 350 square feet down to 210, as we're pulling that square footage out, we, just by getting to that 210, that saved them an average of $22,000 on an annual basis. So you can tremendous effect on the bottom line that you can see there just by this example from this one tenant.
Hey, Kevin, let me chime in there for a quick second. So you mentioned a moment ago about the 150 square foot targets a lot of companies were working towards. A little statistic to share with the group is 8-9 years ago, the average office space was averaging around 225 to 230 per seat. That's taking into account circulation, kitchens, reception areas, conference rooms, offices versus cubicles and workstations. And that trend was trending downward quickly, very quickly, with urbanization, with live work, walkability factors, call centers, technology and tools, where we're in a paperless society these days in most businesses. So if you think about the old way of doing architecture, the old way of doing engineering, the old way of doing accounting work, where everything was very, very paper intensive or workspace intensive, everything was shrinking down to single screens, laptops, dual monitors on a desk, and less paperwork. So for instance, the Quicken Loans, pre-COVID was sitting around 85 to 95 square feet per employee, very, very tight. The old EDS model years ago was in that 80 to 100 square feet per person. But the national average was sitting at 171 pre-COVID and trending to 150. What we're going to probably see post-COVID is a bounce back and a rebound to go back upwards because of desire by employees for social distancing and safety factors. But offsetting that is going to be the work from home off-site balance. So there's going to be a little bit of a push-pull for the next 6 to 12 or 6 to 24 months for a lot of companies to try and figure out what their new watermark is and what their ideal sizing is going to be to function their business in a profitable way.
Exactly. And going to the next slide there, Matt, one thing that we're looking at is as they're starting to get to this new norm, they're considering, and our clients are considering, a circulation increase. So typically on the right, you'll see this is kind of what we use if we had a client looking for space, and we factored in, 30% circulation. But as Matt's saying, you're going to start to see, common corridors in office space where, you get that circulation or walk through, increasing to, maybe 6 feet or more, or different spacing of cubicles, right, as they start to get there. So we're going to predict, as Matt's saying, a little bit of a circulation increase due to the social distancing and spacing. And obviously, some solutions for that, different furniture vendors have a ton of really great product in order to, as you start to come to the workforce, help with, sneeze screens, different barriers, different types of cubicles, and things like that. So there's a lot of option out there. But as Matt's saying, as we're starting to come back, there is going to be a change no matter which way you look at it. It's just a matter of understanding what's best for your company going forward. Okay.
So, go ahead, Sam.
And next slide here, guys. We have other options. So if right sizing is kind of not in the docket for you, you still might be feeling stuck, where you're in a current lease situation. What are the other options that you should be looking at with either the real estate professional or internally with your company? What are some other means that you can go about navigating your current situation in light of everything that's going on? So the two left and right are kind of two different scenarios. One, if you're in a lease, what are some good things to look out for? And on the right, we're looking at, well, if you're coming up on a renewal, if you're getting back in the market and looking for new space, right? Or your lease is expiring, what are some things that I should be looking for or doing as you're kind of going into those two different scenarios? So guys, I'll turn it over to you on some of those things that we look out for our clients.
Well, Kevin, I'll jump in. I think the first thing you need to do is conduct a lease abstract and understand exactly the clauses and the permissions of your contract, because every contract is different. And unlike a lot of other standardized forms in the residential market or other markets of real estate, the commercial market is not standardized. So lease documents are very specific to a property, to a landlord, or to a tenant relationship. It's important to have that abstracted and understand what your rights are to expand, to contract, to terminate, to renew, what your clauses are for default, understanding where your risks are if you don't pay on time, things of that nature. And having a professional, our group or another group, do that for you is typically a pro bono event, and trying to understand the lay of the current situation. The next is, what are the potentials for subleasing? Are you able to do it? Most leases are, depending on the nature of the property and the type. What are the conditions or the approvals that the landlord retains for consenting to a sublease? If there's a profit in the sublease, who retains the profit? If there's not a profit with the current economic times, it's more likely not. Then are you able to cover the shortfall? So if you're paying 20 and your subtenant comes in for 15, are you able to cover the additional 5 in the delta? Probably a more long stretch in a lot of cases is assignment. It's always a goal to try and do an assignment and get the companies off the hook and off the liability, but it's a challenging one unless the new tenant coming in to take your space and take your obligation is of equal to or better credit. It becomes a pretty difficult argument, but if they are a better credit tenant, then there is a real good avenue there to approach a landlord to try and get acceptance on an assignment so that the outgoing party can move on without the liability going forward. Probably the most probable and an often circumstance is just trying to understand the strategy of the go forward future and create a strategic negotiation with the landlord regarding blend, extend, and right size. If you're in 8,000 square feet and you need 6 and you've got 2 years left in your lease, but you really like the property, you like the building, it serves your needs, the location works, the brand works, there's no harm in approaching a landlord early, a year, 6 months, 2 years, even 3 years out, and having a legitimate conversation about your go forward, that you're willing to do a new 5-year push, but you'd like to bring the rates down and you'd like to right size the square footage and see if that new term commitment gives the landlord confidence in his cash flow while allowing you to free up some immediate capital for your operations. And it happens all the time. It's a big part of the commercial real estate business, and happens on a regular basis. Terminations are typically more structured to a clause of a pre-existing agreement and the ability to do that based on triggers. But sometimes there's ways of getting into that based on certain deliverables of services, whether it's a landlord breach or a tenant breach. Buyouts. We've spent a lot of time doing buyout negotiations and actually facilitating getting a tenant off the hook by cutting a one-time check for a portion of the remaining liability in order to move those changes through. And then the big part is just what options is the landlord willing to offer when you ask the question? Because if you don't put a chip on the table and ask, you're not going to see anything. And there's no harm in the question. Doesn't mean you're going to like the answer, but there's typically some sort of education that comes out of that communication that is going to move the needle in the right direction.
Well said. And the next part on the right side, Sam, if you want to jump in here, is, if your leases is starting to expire, and as Matt said, blend and extends are all great options, or you're looking for new space, is just what are some things to be looking at, as you're going forward in the market and really paying attention to your options and terms while getting into a new lease, especially in light of everything that's going on, just making sure you're getting comfortable when you get into that new liability.
Guys, it looks like we have a question here from John. So if many businesses start right sizing, are you worried about building owners going under and commercial real estate values dropping? So I would say there's a variety of factors that play into that. But I wouldn't say it's necessarily a bad thing for building owners. If you're right sizing, it also means that you're going to have available space for new tenants to come into your building. So if you have a building that's in a great location, has great amenities and stuff like that, you're going to continue to attract tenants, and you're going to have those extra spaces where you can bring more tenants in, create more of that culture that you want to see in the office space. And I wouldn't say it's necessarily a bad thing or, real estate values dropping, but it's how the landlord kind of reacts to that and how they're able to flip the new space that they get back or expand that into new tenants and new opportunities.
Sam, I'll chime in with an additional comment on that too, is you never know the circumstance of the property and the landlord's position, whether it's a single ownership, a corporation, a partnership with other investors, what their debt component is. For instance, if they have an SBA loan, they've probably already received, without even asking for it, a 6-month deferral on principal and interest payments through the SBA. So if they're receiving that relief, many of those landlords are willing to pass that relief on to the tenant. If they're in a more commercial, standard regional bank mortgage, they're probably not getting that unless they're asking for it. Most of the banks are being reactionary, not proactive. But if they're in a conduit, life company, or securitized mortgage, they're very, very difficult to obtain relief right now or forbearance, and they're going to be in a difficult pickle. So John, to answer your question, could there be challenges with properties going back or having major value drops? The answer is absolutely. Do we predict that in the office space? We would say, and we would tell you that it's a little too early to tell what the true cause and effect is on office space for the next 6 to 12 months. We think the retail market is going to take the largest hit and the greatest hit and the most immediate impact hit. And that's happening now. It was actually happening prior COVID with the Amazon effect and e-commerce and other things taking a bite out of the apple. And really that trend was accelerated and exemplified during COVID. So I think that's going to be the biggest impact in the near-term future. We actually have confidence that the industrial market went into these changes very, very tight and very high-performing. And we actually think the industrial market's going to weather the storm relatively well and actually come out of it stronger, because we just have a belief that the U.S. economy, U.S. business market does not want to continue to wait for staple products, staple goods, or medical supplies from foreign countries on the go-forward basis. We think there's going to be a fairly meaningful spike in manufacturing here in the U.S. in light of the reset and the change. But that's more of a prediction.
Cool. Thank you.
You're welcome. So I think back to the communication with landlords, it's important to just talk and ask questions, have dialogue, try and understand what their definition of a win is, what your definition of a win is, and try and create a win-win. If you go into that dialogue with a my way or the highway, in often cases, landlords get pretty firm on their contracts and it becomes a difficult argument. and becomes maybe a more expensive argument when it goes to a legal matter. But if you approach it in a healthy way for a win-win, we find a great deal of success in a lot of communication. The reality is landlords and tenants are all trying to navigate what the world is shifting into and what the cause and effect is on their properties. And not all tenants are the same. There are companies that are going to bring back a lot of their employees relatively quick because they have to. And there's other companies like Facebook, Twitter, and for the short term, the next 6 months, Ford Motor Company, who are finding ways to keep their people at home and still stay as productive as possible to weather the health scenarios out there.
All right, next slide we have here is returning to the workforce, and this is opening up, as you're returning to the facility and working with your property managers, what are some things to look out for and what you should be expecting? And then we'll get into some predictions, and Matt was touching on just some market analytics. We'll start to explore the different industrial, office, and retail markets a little bit in more depth and what we're seeing and some trends that we're predicting. But we'll start by just what is the workforce, or what's the workspace, going to be looking like as you're starting to come back into the office and into the facilities.
Yeah, good morning, everybody. So as in the introductions, my name is Zack Warson. I'm the Director of Property Management here at Team Core. We have a full service property management platform on the commercial and industrial side. That goes from the facility management all the way to the back end accounting platform. So discussing what we've done, let's say since we started COVID, getting into now where we're kind of in the middle of some companies looking to return to work. So we've looked at it as kind of a three-phase right now. Number one was the beginning. We looked at a lot of our buildings to see what we have there that we can do to ensure safety of our tenants and guests coming into the buildings. So we started the cleaning was the number one, talking with our cleaning companies to make sure that, they're equipped with the supplies, they understand the protocols, looking at things like the hand sanitizing station, all the way down to paper towel dispensers, making sure those are, non-touch censored. So we did an analysis of all of those things very early. And then also, it was very important on the property management side to have an action plan if you did have a potential risk of exposure in a building. So we interviewed, a few companies on that to have our cleaning and our action plan in place to make sure if we did have any potential risk for exposure, we were ready to jump on it immediately. The second part, and was touched on the last slide, is the tenant relations communication. That's very important to us. All of the tenants that come into our buildings, we try very hard to build a relationship with them. And we have a lot of tenants in our buildings that are long-standing, and we've been able to do that. And it's not so much, as it was talked about in the last slide of, the rent and that. But there's a lot of people out there right now that are happy just to talk to other people and have conversations, not so much about business, not so much, just life. How's the family? How's everybody doing? And then talk about what's your return to work plan look like. And so we've had a lot of those conversations, especially in the last 30 days, making sure, we're understanding what their plan is. If they need help as far as what we talked about, the design of the space, if they're moving around furniture or spacing, making sure some products, if they're purchasing to do those, what could they use those for in the future? If it goes back to, we don't know, obviously, we can't predict what it's going to look like in the space. If this is going to here to stay, some of these principles probably will stay. But some of the investment that they would have to do right now, how could we look at what you're going to use today, being in COVID and returning to work, and then for the future and not having that, be a waste of capital for you. The third thing that we're in right now is kind of the return to work, when we're full back in, and then the guest and visitor management. So the tenants that are in your building, you have a good relationship and understanding of what their return to work. But the component to us right now that we've been working very diligently on is when those companies start bringing guests and visitors back into the building as business as normal. So there's a lot of products that have came out in the last 30, 60 days, all the way obviously from the temperature checks to protocols to the thermal imaging at the door, tying into access control. So, and that goes into, your vendors coming in, making sure that when we're back, there's a containment if something happens or if there's a potential risk. And we found by talking to our tenants about their return to work and bringing guests in, that if we're able to have them feel safe again about bringing guests in. There's a lot of our businesses that are not planning on bringing guests or visitors in, or very, very small for the foreseeable future. The key that we've done is if a guest is coming in, we know where they're coming into the building and where they've been if something was to happen, and having that open communication lines and having that trust with our tenants that when we start bringing people back into buildings on the guest side or outside, that they feel in a safe environment, that we are prepared not only from a pre-side of bringing in, but also if something did happen, the trust of the communication and our action plan would go into place.
It's well said, Zach. And if everybody sees the screen right now, if you happen to be seeing the viewing, some of these stats on the right-hand side, the bullet points, are fresh as of yesterday. This just came out of a poll done by the Detroit Regional Chamber. They polled a lot of their membership, and it's a pretty good cross-section of Southeast Michigan, but found the response fairly interesting. 62% of the respondents say that more than 3/4 of their current staff is working remotely. 83% of organizations have already created and have a return to work strategy that they're working towards. Let me pause there. We think that there's multiple strategies. There's a current strategy. There's an augmented strategy that needs to be a pivot or an audible. Once we all learn what the schooling and educational system is going to be doing here in the fall, and how it's going to affect the dual income families with children in education. For those that don't have children or those that aren't dual income, it's going to have less effect. But those that are, it's going to not only affect those families in scheduling, but it's going to affect the employers who are employing them and how they get that deliverable and accountability. So there's going to be second phases and third phases into that reopening strategy. Only 5% of the respondents stated their organization will not be transitioning back to the workforce until 2021. Which means it's a pretty good chunk, 95%, that said they're planning to go back in, and they're planning to go back in relatively soon. 58% of the respondents say that they're going to commit to some level of a hybrid strategy or a balancing of schedule strategy. And so these are important things that all companies are thinking about, they're talking about, and they're trying to navigate from top down and bottom up. How they take care of their people to make sure their people are safe, how their employees' families are safe and secure, but also how the business at the end of the day can stay profitable or be above the bottom line and make sure that they exist. And it's a global strategy. It's not a local strategy. So everybody's going through it in just different manners and different timelines.
All right. Our next focus is on the market in general. And then, as Matt said, touching on some of the main product types and some of the trends that are coming out of it. And to start, and I think one of the comments that was in the chat box as well was the industrial. and how this is one of our front runners for what we feel is going to come out kind of the strongest in light of all this and a lot of what was already happening with e-commerce and last mile. And, we made the comment yesterday that Amazon their building's pretty much already built, here already up and running almost. So we do believe that industrial will fare the best here. And looking at some of the analytics here, the vacancy rate, this is again up for all of Oakland County. But 3.5%, and as you get into the smaller submarkets like Troy, you're looking at a percent, sometimes even under 1%. Auburn Hills, right around that range. Rochester Hills, all around. That smaller vacancy, just continuing to show that demand is strongly high for industrial product. Looking at office, we touched on this a little bit already, but in terms of, trends, we're, again, with that negative net absorption and what is the new norm as we're starting to come out of this, I think, that's going to be a major shift here. Guys, I don't know if you have any other touch points on office before we go to retail.
Well, I'll make a comment on all the classes for a second, and that is most of the stats, as Kevin's reviewing, are pre-COVID and current to date, but there's been a very limited amount of activity and transactions and/or recorded transactions over the last at least 60 days, but more like 90 days. So the true shifts and the trend changes haven't really hit the stats yet. You're going to see a fair amount of change coming out in the next 3 months, 6 months, and I think everybody's going to have a clearer picture by the end of the year on what the real cause and effect of how much new vacancy came online in the classes, in what areas, what that did to the asking rates and the asking price points. So, take this as a static point in time, that the true cause and effect of the shutdown or the revamp or the changes really hasn't taken effect through the numbers yet.
Yep, and we can jump into retail here a little bit. And like Matt was saying, these numbers are more or less pre-COVID, and we haven't seen too many changes as a result. As tenants have been paying rent, they've been staying on top of that for the most part. But what we're going to start to see in the next 6 to 12 months is how do these retail tenants, how do the restaurants, the nail salons, the coffee places, how do they pay rent with having limited people in their spaces? How do they evolve, and how are they able to use their quota still where they want to be and be able to be effective in making money with, their business model is based on being at 100% occupancy, which, where we're currently at, we're, less than 50% right now. So how are the retail tenants going to, evolve, and how are they going to make changes? I know one big thing that we're looking at and what we're seeing in the downtown areas is outdoor seating, which is something that has definitely expanded a lot. Cities such as Brighton are shutting down their Main Street on Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. So there's no cars allowed down there, and they're allowing the restaurants and the coffee places to expand their seating into the road and into the sidewalk areas, which gives them a higher capacity, but it still doesn't get to that 100% capacity that they previously were at. So it's going to be interesting to see in the next 6 to 12 months how these retail tenants evolve and how they adapt to not being able to have as many people in their locations, but still be able to be profitable.
I'll lay out a prediction out there on the restaurant side, Sam, for the group, and that is if the restaurateur is a large corporation who signed a very expensive lease to a piece of property with a certain expectation that they'll turn so many tables every evening and so many patrons through the door, those restaurants are probably going to take the greatest hit in the short term, where the smaller, nimble, entrepreneurial restaurant that is maybe even owned real estate is going to have the path of least resistance to be able to continue on and weather the storm in a healthy way, because they're not stricken by that monster lease payment, or they can work with their, if it's owned and it's debt-free, great. If it's not debt-free, they can work with their lenders because it's all part of the same process. Just a quick prediction, but most of us have favorites in our communities we all like to navigate towards or around, but maybe that prediction plays out over the next 12 to 24 months.
Definitely. And then Matt, with the other side of retail, was kind of speeding up the Amazon effect. So, you know, the last 3 to 4 months has caused all of these retail tenants to kind of shut down and not be able to serve clients and stuff like that, or they're not having a lot of people walking in, or, you know, the urban areas don't have that walking traffic that they used to. So what we call is the Amazon effect, where everyone's ordering stuff online, and hopefully these retail tenants are able to, you know, pivot their inventory into online sales and stuff like that. But it just sped up that Amazon effect, like we like to call it. And I think it's going to be interesting, obviously, over the next 6 to 12 months to see, you know, how that plays out. Do a lot of these retail tenants, you know, shy away from the brick and mortar and go back to the, you know, the online sales that seems to be successful at the time. And it also has a little bit less overhead for them in the long run.
So the opportunity in front of us there, Sam, is to get creative on who's going to consume that kind of square footage and retail box space 5 years from now, and what's the new business model that's going to fall into that.
Definitely.
All right, and with it, guys, we did want to save some time for questions and understand if anybody has any questions geared towards a current situation that you're facing, anything about the market, any other, you know, any other inquiries in regards to opportunities. Just wanted to open up and take some time here to do just kind of an open forum discussion.
So Kevin and Matt and Sam and Zach, we did get one question through the chat feed that asks about their lease, as far as having so much time left on it, maybe a short amount of time, like 1 year. And they think that they have about twice as much space as they're going to need ultimately going forward. And possibly what should they do or consider doing? And I think maybe that leads into another question, actually, as far as the right time to start discussing relocation, right sizing, and or possibly a lease renewal. So if you could touch on that, that would be great.
Sam, you want to take it?
Yeah, so I would say the right time and in the right time to start those discussions, whether it's with your landlord or it's having a real estate representative do that for you, is as soon as the space doesn't feel comfortable for you, as soon as your business model doesn't work for the space, and the sooner the better. And like Zach touched on earlier, it's great to have that relationship with your property manager, with your landlord, and be honest and open with them, because they want to see your business succeed in the long run, as well as, you know, their business, because they have the real estate and you guys are operating in that. So I would say the sooner the better. If we're, you know, looking for, I guess, 6 to 12 to 18 months out, we like to start as soon as possible.
Yeah, I would say 6 months is probably the shortest period of time you want. You really want to have that dialogue no later than a year out, and that's in a normal circumstance outside of COVID or anything else. That's just normal general business practices. But it's not bad to have, as Sam said, early discussions when you, as a principal or somebody who's responsible to bottom line, realizes that you have dead space that's not producing any revenue. If you're in that position, you don't feel you're going to need it in the near-term future. If you have 3 years left on your lease, talk to your landlord. You never know what motivations both parties can come to try and navigate a win-win, so you don't have to carry dead space. It's never too early.
Awesome. So I also received another question here, and it's specifically about co-workspace. And I don't know that we've really touched much about it, but I know that there's some facilities and or offices that are set up as specifically co-workspace. But if someone were to realize that they're going to start a work from home environment, but they have all this space and a considerable amount of time on their lease, is there something that needs to be discussed? Obviously, I know sometimes and more often than not, leases are written in that you are not allowed to also lease then space out to other parties. But what are some nuances that you're seeing and or that you understand around co-workspace environments?
Let me see if I can attack it 2 different ways. I want to attack it more from a a U.S.-based approach, a bigger approach, and then one that's more local to the local strategy. This is an ongoing topic globally and affecting the bigger CBD markets like Atlanta, New York, San Francisco, Seattle, Chicago, in a much greater way than they're affecting Detroit. And that New York, there is a considerable millions of square feet of co-working space in WeWork and other competitive companies that over the last 5 to 7 years had absorbed a lot of space. And those business models have been aggressively challenged and taken a lot of heat pre-COVID and even more so post-COVID, that they might not be viable going forward. The reality of that is we don't know yet. We think that there's a fair amount of vacancy that's going to come back on market and or very unique, cool, marketable space, but you're going to be fetching longer term solution tenants for that space that otherwise aren't going to be filled by co-working environment solutions. And the flip of that, though, is a lot of companies, and this is more local, are going to say, I don't need 8 to 10 or 30 people in the space today. I need a good meeting spot that I can get everybody together once a month. So I want access to conference rooms and shared settings. I want to have 5 to 7 people on a full-time basis in, because their roles and responsibilities demand that they need to be there. But the rest of the group, I'm going to leave it open and have remote seating. And I'm going to let them come and go as they see fit, work off site, but come in when they need to do something with staff. And we're going to go from 30 in the door pre-COVID to 5 to 7 full-time and 5 to 7 roaming. And we're going to cut it down to 15 on the back end and reduce a lot of facility costs and maybe, strengthen that off-site culture. The only thing that really works against that is culture is really, really difficult to create without social interaction and connections. So, we've been trying to advise clients, now's not the time to make a knee-jerk reaction. The government put CARES Act in place, PPP and other stimulus, in order to basically give the world a forced sabbatical to stay healthy. So take advantage of the solutions at the table and do what you have to do to make sure families and your employees are safe. And let's revisit the reopen in a healthy manner when appropriate. And that's really what that was intended to do, and for many companies has done. Those companies that believe their revenue model and their ability to sell a product or provide a service and make revenue, and that they will be able to do that on the back end, they should probably be patient, stay the course, and evaluate all the different options, because there's a lot of new data and new information and new resources coming out on a daily basis, if not hourly basis these days. But those companies that forever have been changed, and they feel like they're in dire strait where they just will not be able to make the revenue metric work going forward, those are the ones that probably have to jump to the forefront right now and start asking the really difficult questions on how do I navigate a resolution without being crippled? How do I navigate a change here without being personally or corporately on the hook for a major financial event that we can't afford to handle? Those are the difficult conversations that need to be had as soon as possible, if indeed there's a need for that. But otherwise, this is a time, in our opinion, to be educated, to absorb, to take in a lot of intel, to take care of health and safety, to talk to your customers. Probably the greatest benefit and silver lining through this is that the people that you wanted to talk to that wouldn't take your phone call, or customer that you couldn't get a hold of because they were too busy, they're taking your phone call today. They have time to talk, as Sam and Zack pointed out earlier. They have a willingness to share and commiserate about the stories of what their challenges are, what they're going through, and how they're navigating it. And it's a good time to have those touch points.
Yeah, and one comment on that too. There's so many companies that pre-COVID haven't even started the infrastructure of that for a work from home component to their business. And now that these companies were forced into having a majority of their employees or all of their employees for a time at home, you're now coming into the return to work of, they're figuring out, okay, we could survive and work at home. Now we're bringing employees back, but what does that mix look like, and how are we setting up our space to be appropriate to utilize some of that infrastructure that we've put in place for work from home? So from that aspect too, it's so new for a lot of these companies, and it's amazing some of the stats of companies that have not put that in place prior or started that now, we're forced into it in a very short time. So I feel like it's going to be that's a learning process for a lot of those companies as they come back, and how they're going to utilize that over time in some kind of mix.
Well, a lot of companies don't have the accountability metrics to really manage it in a healthy way. They were forced into it very, very quickly, and they've been running on the trust factor going into it. But now, as things start to come back and level off, they're going to need and look at how do we create metrics, sustainability, and accountability around work off-site, work home, and remote working to make sure that the business is successful. Because if production is up, that's great. It's generally fairly obvious. But if production's down and revenue's down and expenses remain the same or higher, then that's going to become fairly obvious fairly quick too, and they're going to need to make adjustments. So we do believe there's a fair amount of to-do work in the professional management, office setting, coaching, analytics side that is going to really take shape over the next 6 to 24 months to help a lot of those companies who were forced into it very rapidly to help figure out the accountability and metric model around their business.
Yeah, I think the biggest question is how are we going to analyze how those employees are working from home? Are they as productive? And that analytics is going to take another 6 months to even get started to find out, no, Bob was only 40% productive at home where we need him in the office. But we're going to see some time before that happens, I think.
Hey, Pat, I think that was Patrick. Patrick, well said. We agree with you.
So let's shift a little bit, because one of the things they've talked about with this whole thing is how so many people who get laid off are going to be looking at their entrepreneurial spirit and may actually try to start their own businesses. And from the perspective of landlords wanting to work with maybe new startups, or the consideration of taking on new small business owners and their small teams and having space available to do so, what are some of the nuances for those type of individuals? What are some of the things that they can actually benefit from with getting into space right now? And then from the side of the landlord, like wearing your property management hat, where do you see that you could actually help some of these people in giving them some direction on these things?
Well, Gene, it's a great thought process. I'll start by saying the vast majority of our business and opportunities and efforts that we spend our time with is consulting companies through their needs and helping them do site selection, finding space, and analyzing the best solution for their business. So that's probably 70 to 80% of our activities. The balance is the property management. It's to collect the rent, run the building, fiscally sound, vendor management, and produce quality reporting and quality return projections for the property owners. And fortunately, that portfolio is relatively full, high occupancy, and good cultured tenants. And so we're helping a lot of those companies through that process as well. But what I think we're going to see is if a landlord has space available in the uncertainty of the go-forward market, they're almost foolish not to keep an open eye and an open mind to a bird in hand. Because if you're waiting for two in the bush, they might never come, to use a phrase. And so the key to any healthy real estate is to keep things occupied, because every day that it's not occupied is a lost day. Sometimes that means you have to do unique transactions, unique deals, work with companies unique ways, and go out on a limb to do something creative and flexible that wouldn't have otherwise been the norm, because a landlord's best position is to always get the highest rent, the highest credit tenant for the longest period of time. It's a very simple equation. But that's not always what the marketplace will deliver. And so from an entrepreneurial standpoint, I think that when you break it down by category, restaurant landlords or restaurateur landlords or retail landlords, I have a feeling there's gonna be a stronger push for percentage rents and not being into a fixed rent scenario because there's so much uncertainty in the foot traffic and the customer coming through the front door. So the landlords are going to take some inherent risk in that and work with the tenant to give them a mutual path by doing it on a percentage of revenue basis. It's a commonplace across the country, but it hasn't been the mainstay for a number of years. I have a feeling that's going to come back to the forefront a little more. In the office market, I think it's going to be a matter of tenants finding the right space where they're not asking the landlord to put an enormous amount of capital infusion in the space, in improvements, and saying, hey, I'm willing to do a 6-month or a 12-month lease or a 3-year lease with a termination clause if my business model doesn't work, but I'm not asking you to invest a lot of dollars. So if you work with me, I'll work with you. And there's going to be a fair amount of that going on to fill those spaces and to help those entrepreneurs out. But for the landlords who aren't going to be willing to do that, they may find themselves looking back in 3 to 5 years, wishing they had taken some of those deals because they might not have another solution.
That makes sense. And interestingly enough, I think that also leads into Peggy Bart's comment in the chat where she talked about the shift, which you've already touched on as far as the shift happening with industrial and something that she must have been all things considered. And she talks about who's going to lead the creative solution to this permanent change. And I think you guys are actually heading in that direction, of course, and have already been leaders in this discussion. But one of the things you just talked about, going back to it, as far as the, rent based on fixed or percentage of revenue. And I wondered if you wanted to really give a little bit more insight to that as far as, the benefits, pros and cons to one versus the other for those of us, looking at this and for small businesses, especially from that perspective.
Well, let me use an example of retail because that's probably where it's most prevalent and easiest to tie a correlation to because there's some experience there historically for the marketplace. In really difficult markets or geographies, landlords would work with retail users who had an idea, who were entrepreneurial, who were trying to do a startup or a new business or an unperfected scenario that was an opportunity. And they would work on a percentage rent basis or percentage of revenue so that it's a shared responsibility. The tenant's got to do their best to run a great business, but at the end of the day, they're only going to pay a percentage of what they make back to the landlord. And that's in a difficult, challenged geography and a challenged market. But what's unique is when it got out of that challenged market and got more stabilized, now all the landlords were able to do, or they didn't want to do percentage rent, they wanted guaranteed payments, they wanted fixed rents, and now the market norm rental analytics like Kevin and Sam projected earlier started taking form in those standardized markets because there was some benchmarking. And the landlords could be, it was more predictable. It's what the guy next door was getting, so why shouldn't I get it? And I'm going to ask and demand that. I'm going to get my best contract, and then I'm going to go to my lender. I'm going to borrow money for a mortgage based on that rent. But what's really unique is when you went to the really high-end markets, the very, very sought-after prime positions in the retail space, they not only got the fixed rent at the highest variables, but they also got a kicker on percentage rent in addition. So it's kind of funny how percentage rent was at the bottom tier and the top tier of the market, but nowhere in the middle. And well, we think that is probably a real life expectation of going forward in a hypothetical strip center, 5,000 square feet that has 6 tenants, and there's 4 viable concepts, but there's 2 dead spaces that have been sitting vacant for 2 years. And the landlord's going to have to get creative and say, I can't command my $18 net or my $25 net rent because I've been doing this for 2.5 years and there's no solutions out there. So I'm going to try and work with a tenant. I'm going to let them invest in the improvements because they don't know their future, and I'm not going to invest in their business maybe, but I will accept a percentage of their revenue. And today it's an easier dialogue because technology has made tracking of revenue more accountable. Landlords didn't like doing it historically because they couldn't always trust or believe in the math that they were getting and what they were obtaining. But today, with online tracking, online billing, online QuickBooks, whatever the platform for ERP is with the companies, especially in the liquor sale business where liquor sales are tracked at the state level, it can be tracked fairly transparently and done very efficiently. So
Gene, I was gonna mention something else on the other side of Peggy's comment about the creativity. Talk briefly. One of our verticals we do on the property management side is third-party project management and build-outs for key clients and representing, being their representative between them and a general contractor, the build-outs. And we had many projects that were going on, large projects throughout, when we hit COVID, that were build outs of open concepts, right? Collaboration spaces, bringing cube walls down, and that was a lot of these projects. So now when we had the construction stoppage, we had to reevaluate all of those. And we had hours of conversations with our clients in those projects to say, now we need to look at this as a two-phase approach. And it's a day one, when the project is done, what's your return to work going to look like? Here's how we need to now work with our furniture vendors, our IT vendors, and make this space work for your day one return to work. But then also having the mindset of thinking a couple years down the road where that space is still set up to do this plan that we had pre-COVID, but not limiting you inside the space, but still making you feel like you're utilizing every square foot of that space for what you can day one. So, on the creativity side, that's been very important and something we've spent a lot of time with our key clients talking about, with obviously everybody going through this, kind of new and looking for guidance. And there's a lot of great information out there right now. And everybody's learning, but we've spent a lot of time on that to be creative, to make sure that their return to work, but also their expansion needs are in place.
well said.
I think we're seeing a shift in how people are presenting their buildings as well. Typically what we saw pre-COVID was a show-off space. So people are creating these offices for visitors to come in. Do you guys feel that we're going to see a downtick from that? And just maybe just a structured, I'm seeing gray and black and white essentially throughout an office space, because you're not going to have those visitors in there. If anything, you make a conference room look like a showpiece behind you. So when your execs are on a call, it looks like they're in this immaculate space, but all the investment out there in your lobby on waterfalls and things like that, I just don't see companies spending that money.
Patrick, for a few extra dollars on Zoom, you can put whatever background you want. And I'm
in my basement right now. I made it look like my office. So.
No, it's a good comment. I think it's too early to really tell. There's a strong percentage of the marketplace that, as these things pass and as people have certainty and safety and feel confident that either A, there's a vaccine, or B, the tide has passed, that they want to get back to some level of normalcy the way it was. And then there's another percentage of the marketplace that says, this was actually, hindsight 2020 and silver lining of a really devastating effect. There's a little bit of a change of guard and some new welcomed change. I keep hearing in the entrepreneur world, I spent a lot of time with a group called EO, Entrepreneur Organization, and I'm past president of the Detroit chapter, and there's about 13,000 members globally. And at that level, when we talk, your financing, there was a lot of dialogue around the PPP and the process. Now it's all about the forgiveness of the process, and it's about layoffs and revenue projections and trying to build your businesses. And the overwhelming thing that I keep hearing is it forced me to slow down. And I can't say that I don't like the fact that I was able to slow down a bit, right? I felt like everybody was running at 150 miles an hour and, on a racetrack, really loose and hadn't come in for a pit stop. And this forced everybody into a forced sabbatical and a forced pit stop that I think there's a percentage of the business community that wants to go back to some level of normalcy, but maybe not all the way. They want to find a little bit better life-work balance because they've spent the last 3 months taking long walks with their dogs or their spouses or their kids.
Yeah, spending that extra time with spending the extra time at home has changed a lot of people's mental state and even myself, pre-COVID, I was at work an additional hours every single day just because that's where my mindset was. But then once I had time to realize, hey, I'm supposed to be at home and focused on family. So now returning to that office is going to be different. I don't want to be here till 7 o'clock at night anymore. So I think there's going to be a lot of people with that mentality going back.
Well, there's a few things, predictions I think we can all make. It has nothing to do with real estate. Has everything to do with just the history books, is that we're probably going to see a baby boom come out of this.
Yeah.
We're going to see a raise in alcoholism and substance abuse. We may see a raise in divorce rates, but I actually hope that we also see a raise in family values and committed marriages and committed relationships that stand the test of time. And so, everybody got off the gerbil wheel for a few months and actually had to realize what was most important to them and what they valued the most. And now they're going to start focusing on those things more and less about the in-between.
You're absolutely right. Well said.
So I'll mention that we are just slightly over our time. At the same time, I think that you all have made such valuable comments. And Matt, I wanted to give you and your team an opportunity to wrap things up and make some final comments and talk a little bit more about, next steps.
Well, I'll go ahead and make a quick comment and put it out there. We're here in Auburn Hills. All of us are based in and around Southeast Michigan. We service the tenant and client needs all over the country with a vast focus on the Southeast Michigan marketplace. We've been doing it for a long time. Our greatest deliverable is that we're a unit, we're a team. We recognize each other's strengths and weaknesses, and we come together to serve a client's collective interest, which is very unique and very rare in business in general, but especially in the real estate space. We are not egocentric, we're very client-centric. And we believe that if there's a box in front of us that you're supposed to work within, there's typically 5 ways to claw out of that box and create a new solution that might be a game changer, a trendsetter, or a really monumental shift for a company to lead the charge in their industry and in their class. And we take a lot of pride in trying to help create those and facilitate them. The vast majority of our work is relationship-based and pro bono until such time as there's an event or a transaction that we can help facilitate. At the end of the day, that's all client-driven, and they get the ultimate say to do or not do. And we're just thankful and fortunate to be there to help them make smart decisions and navigate those waters. On the property management side, we really, really enjoy being extremely transparent, open book, reconciliations on our records of our properties within 3 to 5 days of the close of each month. Every owner gets reports quickly. We're just the shepherds and the custodians of their capital, and we work very hard to maximize their ROI. So with that, we're always open and willing to help out and assist, and there's no such thing as an odd question. Whether you're 200 square feet and need a single office, or if you're 250 employees and you're looking for new strategy, you're going to get treated the same exact way at our company by our team. We value the relationship and being your eyes and ears.
Outstanding. Well, okay. Thank you to our colleagues at Team Core for your insight, your creativity, and your communication and leadership on this. We really appreciate you doing this. This video will be also posted out on YouTube and on our website for future viewers. And I'm sure that we'll get a lot of hits based on what our other webinars have been trending so far. So thank you all so much. Thank you, Matt, Kevin, Sam, and Zach, and everyone else who participated.
Yeah, thank you. Very informative.
Thank you, your staff, the board, and all the participants today. You guys are doing a great job. Keep it up. You're leading the charge.
Thanks.